The night wrapped the banks of the Tisa River in a black shroud, as if nature itself conspired to cloak the desperate act about to unfold. A cold wind howled through the trees, slicing through Maksym's thin jacket, cutting him to the bone. The water roared below, a wild, untamed beast murmuring a warning, "Don't do it, kid. Turn back while you can." But Maksym stood firm on the muddy shore, clutching an old, cracked paddle in his trembling hands. He was just 18, a boy by all accounts, yet his eyes burned with a determination that defied his age, not the carefree spark of youth, but a cold, steely resolve that could have belonged to a man twice his years. The rickety boat he'd scavenged from the reeds rocked violently on the waves, its splintered wood groaning under the strain. It was a fragile lifeline, ready to either carry him to freedom or drag him to a watery grave. Somewhere nearby, dogs barked, their sharp, piercing cries slicing through the stillness like a hunter's call. Beams from the border guards' flashlights danced across the darkness, sweeping the bushes, searching for any sign of movement, searching for him. One wrong step, and he'd plunge into the icy water, cold as death itself. One misplaced sound, a snapped twig, a stifled breath, and they'd catch him, slap handcuffs on his wrists, and haul him back to a life he'd sworn to escape. Why was he here, teetering on the edge of life and death, risking everything he had left? The answer was as simple as it was shocking. His wife, Anna, had betrayed him. She'd left for Romania months ago, promising it was temporary, only to find someone else, a new man, a new life, and erase Maksym from her world, blocking him everywhere as if he'd never existed. But this wasn't just a tale of a broken heart or a teenager's impulsive revenge. No, Maksym carried a secret that would blow your mind. He was a billionaire. Yes, you heard that right, a billionaire. He'd inherited a staggering fortune from his grandfather, 1 billion euros, locked away in a Romanian bank. The money was frozen in Ukraine, trapped by the chaos of war, but over there, across the treacherous Tisa, it waited for him like a treasure chest from a fairy tale, glittering with promise. And he was ready to swim, no, fight, through that river to claim it. Not just for the wealth, but to punish Anna in a way she'd never forget. How did an 18-year-old kid from a nowhere village outsmart everyone, defy fate, and carve his name into legend? Buckle up, because this story will leave you speechless. He hadn't told his parents. Not a word. If his mom found out her only son was planning to flee across the border, she'd lose it. She'd lock him in the house, drop to her knees on the creaky wooden floor, and beg, "Maksym, my boy, don't be stupid. You're all I have." Her voice would crack, tears streaming down her weathered face, her hands clutching his shirt as if she could physically hold him back from the madness. His dad, a man of few words, would react differently. He'd light his old pipe, the one he'd inherited from Grandpa, its familiar tobacco scent filling the room as he sat in silence, staring at the wall. After a long pause, he'd mutter, "This isn't the way, son. Stay home." His tone would be gruff, heavy with disappointment, but Maksym didn't care what they thought. He couldn't bear to explain what drove him, this toxic mix of shame, anger, and a burning need to prove to himself, and to Anna, that he wasn't the worthless nobody she'd discarded. In his mind, one image played on an endless loop, vivid as a Hollywood blockbuster: Anna, sitting in her cozy new Romanian apartment, sipping coffee or scrolling through her phone. Suddenly, a notification pops up, a bank transfer for $30,000, with a simple, cutting note, "For your happy life." Her eyes widen in shock, her hands tremble, dropping the mug or the phone as her mind races. How? Where'd he get this kind of money? Is it really him? She'd scramble to unblock his number, her fingers fumbling as she types, "Maksym, where are you? How did you do this?" But he wouldn't reply. Not a word. That silence would be his revenge, cold, elegant, and utterly ruthless, a dagger to her heart sharper than any argument. But that moment was still a dream, a distant prize. Right now, it was just him, the river, the night, and the border guards who could shatter everything with a single shout. Maksym glanced at the boat, old, leaky, its paint peeling off in flakes, revealing the weathered wood beneath. He'd found it a week ago, half buried in the reeds by the river, tripping over it barefoot while ducking out of a sudden downpour. It's a sign, he'd thought, his heart skipping a beat as he brushed the mud off its hull. For 2 days, he'd worked in secret, dragging it through the underbrush to a hidden spot, covering it with branches and leaves so no one would spot it. This was his plan, his lifeline: wait for the cover of darkness, when the border guards grew sluggish from their endless night shifts, when the dogs dozed off in their kennels, and the flashlights stopped their relentless hunt for shadows. Then he'd slip the boat into the water, climb aboard, grip the paddle, and row with everything he had, row to Romania, to his €1 billion, to Anna, to a life where he'd never be underestimated again. But his first attempt? It was a complete disaster. He remembered that night like it was etched into his soul. The moon had vanished behind thick clouds, the sky black as coal, swallowing every star. Everything seemed perfect, silence reigned, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the rustling of reeds in the breeze. Maksym had prepared carefully. He slipped on his old sneakers, the soles worn thin from years of use, pulled on a threadbare jacket that barely kept out the chill, and grabbed the paddle, its rough wood digging into his palms. He crept to the river, his breath shallow, every step deliberate to avoid snapping a twig or rustling a leaf. He reached the shore, the cold mud squishing under his shoes, and waded into the water. The icy chill burned his legs, seeping through his jeans, but he gritted his teeth, his jaw clenched tight. "I have to do this," he whispered to himself, a mantra against the fear clawing at his chest. He just pushed the boat off the shore, the current tugging it gently, when the silence shattered. Barking, sharp, piercing, like a blade through the stillness, erupted from the trees. A flashlight beam swept across the water, missing him by a mere meter, its light glinting off the waves. "Stop," a rough voice bellowed, echoing over the river. Panic surged through him. Maksym dove into the bushes, branches clawing at his face, tearing at his skin as he scrambled for cover. His heart pounded like a war drum, threatening to burst from his chest, his breath ragged and loud in his ears. He hit the ground hard, mud soaking into his clothes, and lay there, frozen, holding his breath as the guards' boots crunched closer. Their voices faded into murmurs, the dogs' barking softened as they moved off, but he didn't dare move, not yet. He stayed there, face pressed into the damp earth, until the night swallowed them whole again. "Not yet," he whispered, dragging himself to his feet, his body trembling from cold and adrenaline. He trudged home, soaked to the bone, his jacket caked in mud, his sneakers squelching with every step. His legs shook, threatening to give out, but one thought burned brighter than the fear: "I won't give up." He didn't know it then, but that failed attempt was just the beginning. Nights of terror, heart-pounding chases, and a relentless fight for every inch toward freedom stretched out before him like a gauntlet he had no choice but to run. That first night haunted him as he lay in bed later, staring at the cracked ceiling of his childhood room. The wind rattled the windowpane, a mocking echo of the river's roar. He replayed every moment, the barking dogs, the flashlight's glare, the guard's shout, searching for what he'd done wrong. "I was too loud," he muttered, clenching his fists under the thin blanket. "Next time, I'll be quieter. Next time, I'll make it." Sleep wouldn't come, his mind raced with plans, adjustments, a burning resolve to try again. He couldn't let Anna win, not like this. She'd left him behind, discarded him like trash, but he'd show her. He'd show everyone. The €1 billion waiting across the border wasn't just money, it was power, proof that he was more than the poor village boy she'd abandoned. And that $30,000 he'd sent her? It'd be the first taste of his victory, a bitter pill she'd choke on when she realized who he'd become. But first, he had to conquer the Tisa. The next day, he scouted the river again, hiding in the trees as the border guards patrolled. He watched their patterns, the way they lingered near the bridge at dusk, the way the dogs perked up at every rustle. He memorized the terrain, the shallow spots where the water slowed, the rocky patches where the current turned deadly. He'd need more than luck, he'd need a strategy. The boat was still there, tucked away in its hiding spot, a silent promise of another chance. "Tomorrow," he told himself, his voice low but firm. "Tomorrow, I'll try again." The wind carried his words away, but the fire in his chest only grew. This wasn't just about Anna anymore, it was about him, about proving he could do the impossible. And so, under the cover of another moonless night, he returned to the river, paddle in hand, ready to face the darkness once more. Maksym was born in a small village near Ternopil, a speck on the map where time seemed to stand still. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, where every house carried the faint scent of wood smoke drifting from chimneys, and chickens scratched lazily in the dust along unpaved roads. His life was simple, predictable: school, where he sat at the back of a cramped classroom, doodling cars and trucks in the margins of his notebook instead of listening to the teacher drone on about history or math; the garden, where he'd spend hours under the sun, helping his mom plant potatoes or pull weeds, the dirt caking under his nails; and soccer with the boys on a patchy field behind the village, where they'd kick a worn-out ball until the sky turned orange. He wasn't a straight-A student, his grades hovered in the middle, enough to get by, but he wasn't a troublemaker either. Just a kid with quiet dreams, vague hopes of breaking out someday, maybe heading to Kiev to see the towering buildings, ride the subway, feel the pulse of a bigger world. But at 17, everything he knew shifted. He met Anna. She came from the next village over, a tall girl with long, dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders like a river of ink, and eyes that burned with a restless fire, as if they held secrets and dreams too big for their little corner of Ukraine. She was 19, older than him by 2 years, and she carried herself differently from the local girls, who giggled about boys and planned weddings before they'd even finished school. "I don't want to rot here," she'd say, her voice sharp with conviction as they walked through the golden fields at dusk, holding hands, the grass brushing against their legs. "I want to live, not just survive. I want to see the world, Paris, London, anywhere but this dead-end place." Her words hit Maksym like a spark to dry tinder. He'd never met anyone like her, someone who saw beyond the village, who dreamed in colors he hadn't dared imagine. He fell hard, fast, and deep, the way you only do when you're young and the world still feels conquerable. 6 months later, they were married. There was no grand wedding, no white dress, no band playing late into the night, just a quick signing at the village council, a formality scratched onto paper. "All that matters is we're together," she said, flashing that warm, radiant smile that made his chest ache. He believed her with every fiber of his being. He thought it was forever. Their early days were simple but sweet. They lived in a small room at his parents' house, a cramped space with a sagging bed and a single window that let in the morning light. Anna would hum while cooking borscht on the old stove, and Maksym would sit nearby, watching her, feeling like the luckiest guy alive. They'd talk about the future, nothing grand, just a house of their own someday, maybe a car, a life where they wouldn't have to count every hryvnia. But then the war came, a dark cloud that rolled over Ukraine and changed everything. The village grew quiet, tense. Men disappeared, some drafted into the army, others hiding in the woods or fleeing across borders. Anna started sitting by the window at night, staring at the empty road, her face drawn and silent. One evening, as the wind rattled the glass, she turned to him and said, "I'm going to Romania. I can earn money there. Here, we're just waiting for it all to end, or for it to swallow us." Maksym's stomach dropped. "What about us?" he asked, reaching for her hand, his voice tight. "It's temporary," she promised, her eyes locking with his, steady and sure. "I'll come back, and we'll buy a house in the city. We'll live like real people, not like this." He didn't want her to go, every instinct screamed to keep her close, but her resolve was unshakable. He agreed, though his heart clenched with a bad feeling, a shadow he couldn't shake. For the first few weeks, she kept her word. She wrote every day, her messages lighting up his phone like beacons in the dark. "It's cold here, but I got a job at a warehouse. Miss you. Love you." He'd reply with emojis, hearts, smiles, little kisses, waiting eagerly for her calls, her voice cutting through the distance to warm the lonely nights. He'd lie in bed, clutching the phone, imagining her in some bustling Romanian town, working hard for their future. But then, slowly, everything changed. Her replies grew shorter, less frequent. "Lots of work," she'd write, the words curt and vague, lacking the warmth he craved. He'd ask, "How are you? What's new?" and get one-word answers, "Fine. Okay." Then, one day, she stopped writing altogether. He called, her number was blocked. Maksym felt something snap inside, a crack splitting through his chest. He didn't sleep that night, pacing the small room, gripping his phone so hard his knuckles turned white. The silence was deafening, a void that swallowed his hope. The next day, desperate for answers, he made a fake social media account, something he'd never done before, and checked her page. What he saw hit him like a punch to the gut. A photo, Anna with some Romanian guy, tall, broad-shouldered, a dark beard framing a smug smile. They were hugging in front of a city backdrop, maybe Suceava, her arm around his waist, her face glowing with a happiness Maksym hadn't seen in months. The caption, "New happiness." His hands shook, the phone nearly slipping from his grip as rage and pain boiled inside him. He texted her from another number, his fingers trembling. "Anya, what's going on? Talk to me." But she blocked that too, cutting him off again, a second rejection that stung even worse. He sat there, staring at the screen, his breath ragged, until he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out, heading to his friend Vasya's place. Vasya knew Anna's friend in Romania, he'd bragged about it once. After a few shots of Horilka, Vasya's tongue loosened. "She's in Suceava, man," he slurred, clapping Maksym on the shoulder. "Living with some Gheorghe guy. They say it's serious." "Sorry, brother." Maksym's jaw tightened. He pulled out a scrap of paper from his pocket, scribbled the address Vasya mumbled offhand, a street name, a number, and folded it carefully. He knew then, he had to find her. Not to win her back, but to face her, to make her see what she'd thrown away. But there was another secret, one he hadn't breathed a word of, not to Vasya, not to his parents, not to anyone. 2 years ago, his grandfather had died, old Ivan, a quiet, solitary man who'd lived alone in a crumbling house on the village's edge. Ivan was a mystery, even to his family. He'd sit on a weathered bench outside his home, smoking his pipe, the sweet tobacco scent drifting on the breeze as he stared into the distance, lost in thoughts he never shared. Maksym loved him, though he didn't fully understand him. Grandpa rarely spoke, but one memory stood out. When Maksym was 12, Ivan had pulled him aside after a long day of fishing by the creek. "Remember, boy," he'd said, his voice low and gravelly, "in life, the key is not to give up. Even when the whole world's against you, you keep going." Those words lodged in Maksym's mind, a quiet strength he'd carry forever. When Ivan passed, Maksym was 16, still too young to grasp the loss. But then, a few weeks later, a letter arrived from a notary, its official seal stark against the plain envelope. He sat in the kitchen, tore it open with shaky hands, and read, "You've inherited 1 billion euros. Maksym laughed out loud, a sharp, incredulous sound that echoed in the empty room. "A billion?" Grandpa didn't even have a TV. He thought it was a scam, some cruel joke, but curiosity drove him to the notary's office in the district center, a dusty building with peeling paint. The notary, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, sat him down and explained, "In the 90s, your grandfather invested in foreign companies, stocks, bonds, things no one here understood back then. He kept it secret, even from your parents. Over decades, it grew into a fortune. It's sitting in a Romanian bank, 1 billion euros. Frozen in Ukraine because of the war, but if you get to Romania, you can claim it." Maksym sat there, stunned, his mind reeling. "A billion? Me? A kid from a village with nothing but a pair of old sneakers?" The notary slid the papers across the desk, bank statements, legal documents, all stamped and signed. It was real. Undeniably real. And in that moment, a thought ignited in his chest, this is my chance. Not just to escape the village, not just to survive, but to become someone Anna could never ignore. That night, he lay awake, the notary's words spinning in his head. 1 billion euros. It was absurd, impossible, yet it was his. He thought of Grandpa Ivan, quiet, unassuming Ivan, who'd worn patched coats and lived off potatoes and bread. How had he done it? Why had he hidden it? Maksym pictured him now, sitting on that bench, pipe in hand, a faint smile tugging at his lips as if he'd known this day would come. "Don't give up," he'd said. And Maksym wouldn't. Anna's betrayal had lit the fuse, but the 1 billion euros were the fuel. He'd get to Romania, claim his fortune, and show her, show everyone, what he was capable of. But first, he had to cross the Tisa, a river that didn't care about his dreams or his money. It was a beast he'd have to tame, and he'd start by finding a way to beat it. Maksym knew he couldn't keep throwing himself at the river blindly, hoping for a miracle. Luck wouldn't carry him across the Tisa, he needed a plan, a real one. The first few attempts had taught him that much, the guards were relentless, the dogs too sharp, the water too unforgiving. He needed an edge, something to tip the odds in his favor. A boat. That was the answer. He spent days scouring the village for anything that could float, checking abandoned sheds, poking through overgrown yards, wading into the reeds along the riverbank where junk sometimes washed up. And then he found it, an old wooden boat, half sunk in the mud a kilometer from home, hidden by tall grasses. It was a wreck, leaky, its paint chipped away, the wood splintered and soft in places, but it was something. He knelt beside it, running his hands over the hull, his pulse quickening. This could work, he muttered, a flicker of hope cutting through the doubt. For 2 days, he worked in secret, hauling it to a secluded spot near the shore. He patched the holes with rags torn from an old shirt, nailed scavenged boards over the weakest spots, his hands raw and blistered by the end. This is my ticket, he thought, stepping back to admire his handiwork before covering it with branches and leaves. It wasn't pretty, but it might just hold. He didn't stop there. Maksym started watching the border guards like a hawk, hiding in the trees or behind haystacks as they patrolled. He noted their routines. They switched posts every 4 hours, lingered near the bridge at dusk with cigarettes glowing in the dark, and let the dogs roam freer after midnight when they thought no one would dare try. He studied the river too, the shallow stretches where the current slowed, the rocky patches where it turned into a churning death trap. The nights grew colder, the wind biting harder, but he didn't care. Every evening, he'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying his plan. I have to get to Romania. To the money. To her. It was a mantra, a lifeline keeping him sane. Anna's face flashed in his mind, smiling with that Gheorghe guy, happy without him, and it fueled him. He wouldn't let her win. Not like this. His second attempt came a few nights after the first. He waited for a storm, rain hammering the ground, wind howling through the trees, masking his movements. He slipped on his sneakers, pulled his hood tight, and grabbed the paddle, its weight familiar now. The boat was where he'd left it, rain pooling in its bottom. He dragged it to the water, the mud sucking at his shoes, and climbed in. The cold bit into his legs as he waded out, but he ignored it, gritting his teeth. I can do this, he whispered, pushing off. The rain drowned out the world, a perfect cover, or so he thought. He rowed hard, the paddle digging into the water, his arms burning with the effort. He was a quarter of the way across when the dogs started, faint at first, then louder, their barks cutting through the storm. A flashlight beam pierced the rain, sweeping wildly. Who's there? A guard shouted, his voice carried by the wind. Maksym froze, then rowed faster, his heart in his throat. The light missed him, but the barking grew closer. He couldn't outrun them, not yet. The boat rocked as he turned back, the current fighting him, and he barely made it to shore, scrambling into the trees as boots splashed nearby. Next time, he panted, collapsing in the mud, rain washing over him. The third attempt was bolder. He waited for fog, a thick, soupy haze that rolled in at dawn, blanketing the river. They won't see me, he told himself, creeping to the shore with the paddle slung over his shoulder. The boat slid into the water silently, the fog swallowing it whole. He rowed slow and steady, every stroke deliberate, his breath fogging in the chill. He was halfway across, farther than ever, when the silence broke. A dog's howl, low and eerie, then a chorus of barks. Flashlights cut through the mist, faint but growing brighter. Stop or we shoot, a voice boomed. Maksym's stomach dropped. He rowed harder, the boat lurching, but the current betrayed him, spinning him toward a rocky outcrop. The hull scraped, wood splintering, and he jumped out, wading back to the Ukrainian side as the guards closed in. He hid in the reeds, chest heaving, as they searched. So close, he whispered, fists clenched. So damn close. The fourth attempt pushed him to his limit. He chose a moonless night, clouds thick and heavy, the wind howling to cover his noise. He'd fixed the boat again, reinforcing it with more boards, his hands now calloused from the work. This is it, he told himself, slipping into the water, the cold a familiar sting now. He rowed with everything he had, arms screaming, lungs burning. He was halfway, when the dogs erupted again. A flashlight beam swept the water, missing him by inches. Get down, a guard yelled. Maksym dropped flat, water flooding the boat, soaking his clothes, his face pressed to the splintered wood. The current carried him downstream, away from the light, and he thought he'd made it. Then, crack. The boat slammed into a rock, the paddle slipping from his hands, the hull spinning wildly. He fought the water, kicking and clawing, until he dragged himself to shore, the wrong shore. Almost, he gasped, shivering in the mud, his body wrecked but his spirit unbroken. I won't give up. The fifth attempt was his breaking point. He'd carved a new paddle from a plank, his hands bleeding from the effort. He went back under cover of darkness, the air still, the silence heavy. He crossed half the Tisa, the boat steady, his stroke strong. Just a little more, he whispered, hope flickering. Then, an engine roared. A border guard boat burst from the shadows, its spotlight blinding him, a megaphone blaring, stop, or we shoot. Maksym rowed faster, desperation fueling him, but they were too quick. They surrounded him, guns drawn, dogs snarling from the shore. Hands yanked him from the boat, cuffs snapped on his wrists, wet clothes clinging to his skin. They dragged him to a station, threw him in a cell, small, cold, iron bars caging him in. Wait for the TCC, a guard grunted, slamming the door. They'll take you tomorrow. Maksym sank to the floor, the concrete freezing against his back, and closed his eyes. It's over, he thought, defeat washing over him. His mind replayed Anna's smile, the €1 billion, the life he'd almost grasped. She thought I was nothing, he whispered, fists tight against the cold. But fate wasn't done with him yet. The next morning, a young guard, barely older than Maksym, with tired eyes and a sloppy uniform, brought him a chunk of bread and a tin cup of water. Eat, he muttered, tossing it through the bars. You won't last long here otherwise. He turned to leave, but the door, he forgot to lock it. Maksym stared, disbelief flooding him. The latch hung loose, the door ajar by a hair. His heart leapt. He waited, listening as the guard's footsteps faded, then crept to the door. One push, it swung open. The corridor was empty, voices distant. Now or never, he thought, adrenaline surging. He slipped out, darted through a back exit, and ran like his life depended on it, because it did. The river loomed ahead, his boat still hidden in the reeds. He dove in, grabbed the paddle, and rowed, the cold biting his skin. Shouts erupted behind him, escapee. Dogs barking, boots pounding. A gunshot cracked the air, the bullet whizzing past, but he didn't stop. The current fought him, waves crashing, but he rowed until his arms gave out. And then, land. The Romanian shore. He collapsed, gasping, mud caking his hands. I did it, he rasped, a grin breaking through the exhaustion. Maksym reached Suceava 2 days later, his body battered but his spirit blazing. He had no money, everything he'd carried was lost to the river, but he sold his watch, an old Soviet relic from Grandpa, its scratched face a bittersweet reminder. The pawn shop gave him just enough for a bus ticket, and he rode into the city, dirt-streaked and hollow-eyed. The bank was waiting, the notary had sent the papers ahead. He walked in, his torn jacket dripping from a morning drizzle, bruises darkening his hands. Are you Maksym Ivanovich? The manager asked, peering over his glasses at the disheveled boy. Yes, Maksym nodded, sliding his soggy passport across the desk. An hour later, it was done. The account unfroze, €1 billion. He sat in a plush chair, staring at the screen, 9 zeros glowing back at him. It's mine, he whispered, fists clenched, a tidal wave of triumph crashing over him. Then came Anna. He tracked her address through Vazia's contacts, a small, neat house on a quiet street, a little garden out front with wilting flowers. He stood there, heart pounding, not from fear but from anticipation. He knocked, the sound sharp in the still air. The door creaked open, and there she was, Anna, in a faded robe, her hair a mess, her eyes widening in shock. Maksym, she gasped, her voice a fragile thread. He didn't speak. He handed her his phone, the screen showing a $30,000 transfer, the note stark, for your happy life. Her face drained of color, her hands shook, the phone nearly slipping. How? Where'd you? She stammered, but he cut her off. I swam the Tisa, he said, his voice ice cold. They chased me with dogs, shot at me. But I'm here. And you thought I was nothing. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she grabbed his arm. I messed up, she whispered, her voice breaking. Georga's not you. I was stupid. Come back, please, I'll fix it. He stared at her, his gaze long and unyielding, no trace of the boy who'd once loved her. You made your choice, he said quietly, turned, and walked away. She called after him, her voice cracking, but he didn't look back. Anna was left alone. Georgia, her new happiness, unraveled fast, drinking first to unwind, then to forget, then every day until the bottle was his only companion. They fought, their shouts echoing through the house, until she couldn't take it anymore. She packed a bag and left, retreating to a tiny apartment in Suceava, a gray box where she lived out her days in solitude. Every morning, she'd wake to the same ache, replaying Maksym's cold words, his final look. She regretted it all, every choice, every moment, flipping through old photos of them laughing in the fields, but he was gone. Her dreams of happiness slipped away, crumbling like sand through her fingers. Maksym built a new life. The €1 billion opened every door, a sleek house in Europe, a thriving business, trips to places he'd once only seen in pictures. He didn't flaunt it, his wealth was quiet, his confidence earned. Anna faded to a memory, a bitter lesson that forged him into someone unbreakable. He moved forward, never looking back, a man who'd conquered the river and the past.